Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We are happy to have you with us, and of course, we are sad for the reasons that bring us together. While we wish we could be meeting in person this evening instead of on Zoom, we nonetheless want to warmly welcome you to our virtual living room. We hope that our time together brings you a small measure of comfort as you continue to mourn during these challenging times. My name is Diane Halivni. I'm the coordinator for community education at JCFS Chicago, and I will serve as our host. We extend our heartfelt appreciation to Scott Bauer and the board of the Lori S. Bauer Foundation for Sudden Loss for their generous support of this program. The foundation was established by Lori's friends and family in her honor to give help, healing, and hope to children and families that have suffered a sudden loss or crisis. Thank you very much for helping us support those who are grieving. And now we will do a quick review of our plan for the evening. We are grateful to our special presenters, Cantor Amy Zussman, Rabbi Joe Ozarowski, Marcy Shore, and Lori Garber Amram, who will share their remarks in the following order. Rabbi Joe will begin the program with a short Devar Torah. We welcome Marcy Shore, who will share her reflections of her grief journey. Following Marcy's reflections, Lori will discuss the manifestations of grief and their impact upon us this season. And then at that point, we will invite you to have some quiet personal reflection time, thinking about your loved one, while Cantor Zussman accompanies us with a melody and shares her thoughts with us. And we will close this program with a brief discussion about poems and writing and a final song to take us with blessings and support to continue on this unknown path that grief has us on. At the conclusion of our formal program at 8:30 approximately, we will invite you to join a small breakout room conversation with grief support staff. And this will give you a chance to share a little bit more about how it's going for you, be in community a little longer, and hear more about support groups that we offer and additional resources. That's of course optional. And for those of you who wish to say goodnight around 8:30, you may do so, of course. So thanks again to everyone for being here this evening, and just a few more quick announcements. We want this to be as meaningful as possible and supportive for everyone. So if you don't mind, please remain on mute. And if you have any questions or comments you wish to share in the chat, our wonderful colleague, Carol Brumer-Glicksman, will be monitoring the chat function. And if you need a little bit more support and you wish to have someone from our staff reach out and speak with you, contact Carol and you will let her know how best to reach you. On the Zoom screen, many of you may be familiar, but if you would like to see both the slides and the speaker, you can choose the view option click on the view option at the top of your screen. For most of you, it's on the top. For those of you on an iPad, it might be towards the bottom. And choose side-by-side view. And we think that will give you the best way to see the presenter and the slides. And later on, we might ask you to, you can go on gallery view if you'd like to see all the people that have joined us tonight. After the program, later in the week, we'll send you some materials, a bibliography, more information about our grief groups. And when we send that out, we'll also be including an evaluation, and we really heartfully ask you to complete it and to share your thoughts with us. We're always looking to improve our program, so feel free to share your feedback with us and let us know what else you might be looking for. And so tonight, we will learn more about grief, and as the writer Helen Keller reminds us, we bereaved are not alone. We belong to the largest company in all the world, the company of those who have known suffering. We acknowledge that we are here for ourselves and we are here for one another. We hope by the end of our time together, you will feel more connected and held. Thank you again to all of our presenters and to Scott Bauer and the Lori S. Bauer Foundation for helping us build this beautiful support community. And so we begin our program tonight with some words of Torah from Rabbi Dr. Joseph Ozarowski. Rabbi Joe, as he is affectionately known, is a board-certified chaplain and rabbinic counselor at JCFS Chicago. He serves the patients and families at Skokie Hospital and at Glenbrook Hospital on a regular basis. I would like to mention that calling JCFS to ask to speak with a chaplain is not only when a loved one is at an end-of-life stage, but for any time in your life when you might like someone to talk to, or you are seeking some spiritual guidance. Again, you can contact our dear colleague Carol, who is happy to speak with you, or Rabbi Joe, and connect you with one of our excellent community chaplains. Welcome, Rabbi Joe, and you'll unmute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diane, for the introduction. And again, welcome to all of you for being here tonight. I offer my condolences to all of you on your losses. It takes a lot of courage to be able to come on with a group that you may not know, neither the participants nor the facilitators, and to give up your evening to spend this hour or so with us is not so easy. We're grateful to you for being here. We hope we can give you some tools and some support as you are on this journey. And my Dvar Torah is actually about journeys based on last week's Torah reading. If you're a synagogue goer, you'll recognize it. If not, I'll explain it to you. We read of Abraham with his family begins a journey with the famous words, Vayomer Hashem el Avram, Lech Lecha. God says to Abraham, go yourself to a place that I'm going to show you. This is significant because tonight's theme is a journey, and we're hearing the famous Debbie Friedman song that is based on these words, and that's why I actually chose it. The journey itself is interesting. God says you go on this journey and I will make your life and your being a blessing. There's a lot of blessing promised there. And there's a whole dispute among the classic commentators as to the lecha, which I'm just going to summarize very quickly. What does it mean, go yourself? Targum Yonatan, the famous Aramaic translation of the Talmud of the Torah, talks about it in terms of going away from your childhood into an adult journey. The classic rabbinic interpretation is Lech Lecha, go for yourself, for your benefit. Rashi quotes it. The Hasidic explanation is Lech Lecha, go to yourself. It's an inner journey, going into yourself, finding yourself in the journey. And then as we continue, we move a little bit further and we find some of the details of Abraham's journey. He takes his family, he takes people that he has adopted and become close to him, his community, as it were, and he goes to the promised land and he settles there and he connects with the local inhabitants and he builds, and he also calls in the name of God, Vayikra b'Shem Hashem. He builds an altar. There's a spiritual element to this. Why am I bringing this up tonight? A little secret here. If you connect this week's Torah reading with the last week's Torah reading with the last few words of the Torah reading before, there's a key clue and connection. Now, most people don't get to the end of the Torah reading. If you don't go to synagogue, you won't hear it at all. And even if you do go to synagogue, by that point, you're thinking to myself, oy vey, when's this going to be over? When's the Kiddush? How long will the rabbi be speaking? But the last few words of the Torah reading before are instructive. They've already started on the journey, and we are told in the last 30 words, Vayamot Terach B'Charan. Abraham's father dies. That's the end of last week's Torah reading. Abram's father dies. This changes quite a bit, actually, the trajectory and the meaning of the journey that we read about Abraham and his entourage this week. Abraham is going into this journey as a mourner. He is in grief. He is grieving. If Kaddish had been written at the time of the Torah, Abraham would be saying Kaddish. But that also gives us some questions to think about. We don't know a lot about Abraham's journey of grief, or maybe we do. We are not told much about Abraham's personal feelings. We are not told about how he processes his grief. He did not have a group like this, either in Zoom or in person, or maybe he did, but the Torah doesn't tell us about it. So what did Abraham do to process his grief on the journey? Maybe, and this is my own idea, I didn't see this in any commentary anywhere, maybe the journey is the way that Abraham processes his grief. And now we begin to understand the other points that I mentioned earlier. Abraham going for himself, for his benefit. Abraham moving away from an earlier part of his life. Abraham going into himself, looking deep into himself to find the resources. Finding in the journey of bereavement a blessing. That's not so easy to do. But he apparently worked at that, and it says that. And the things that he actually did on the journey to connect with those closest to him, with family, with community, finding strength, finding support, building, finding a place to settle, and calling on the name of God. There's a spiritual element to it as well. I think that when you put the 2 points together of Abraham actually undertaking this journey as a bereaved person, they begin to make some sense, and we begin to get an idea of some of the tools that we can use when we are lech lecha, when we are going on our journey continuing. And that's really tonight's purpose. We hope that you will get some helpful support and some ideas from tonight's journey and tonight's time together. May God be with you on the journey, and may we always be together in the future to support each other.
Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi Joe. I would now like to introduce Marcy Shore, a treasured teacher in the Wakanda school system and mother of 2. Marcy's husband, Steve, died unexpectedly in January of this past year from COVID. And sadly, only a week or so later, Marcy's father died after a long illness. Marcy started a special blog called One Day at a Time as a way to manage communication with friends and family, and it became a source of ongoing support to her and to many of us. Marcy is also grieving her Aunt Carol, who died 2 weeks ago, and we all extend our deepest condolences to your entire family, several of whom are attending tonight's program. Welcome, Marcy.
Thanks, Diane. Good evening, and thank you for being here. Although I am honored and humbled by the opportunity to share my story, I wanted to let you know that I'm used to teaching kindergarten to squirrely 5-year-olds, so speaking with all of you is somewhat terrifying and quite challenging. Please grant me some grace as I share my story. Tonight, I will try to pass along some pieces of wisdom I've picked up along my grief journey. I will share what worked for me, but I also know that everyone handles grief differently. I can only hope that my journey is beneficial as you discover what helps you all. When my husband, Steve, was unexpectedly hospitalized with COVID in early December of 2020, I struggled to understand why this was our fate. I started an online blog called One Day at a Time to post updates for friends and family who were checking in and offering support since taking all of the calls and answering the texts had become too overwhelming. When he passed away after a month-long battle with COVID in January 2021, my world imploded. I couldn't believe we were a TV news statistic. And then 1 week later, my father passed away. I was now a single mom with grief, dealing with grief from all directions. I'll be honest, I did not take those losses like a rock star. I was a mess. I kept repeating over and over that I just couldn't do it. My sister stood by my side, constantly reassuring me that I would be okay. I'm so grateful for her, as she was my rock, and she kept me grounded and even kept me breathing. I am a planner, and prior to this loss, I already had my battles with anxiety, so I had a real fight ahead of me. I am so glad that I had family and friends standing by my side and holding my hand as I fought my way back to life. In the early weeks after both of the funerals, I really struggled. I couldn't eat and I couldn't sleep. I know this is common for us that grieve. My sister made sure I kept drinking and eating, but that was extremely difficult for me. I had no interest in eating. Thank goodness friends and family stepped in. We had meals provided for us for months. Even though I was unable to eat or cook, my children were being fed. We had warm meals delivered to our doorstep every night. It was life-saving. One of the first things I really needed to focus on was eating. Keeping yourself healthy is so important when experiencing trauma. Here's my advice for what it's worth. If you are struggling to eat, find one thing that you can eat. For me, it was honestly nothing bundt cake. And if you've never had a nothing bundt cake, I highly recommend you go out and buy one and indulge in one soon. It's delicious. It may sound weird, but that is all I could eat. Literally, I only ate cake for days. Probably not the healthiest choice, but it was food and it was something I could stomach during this painful time. So if you have to eat donuts, French fries, or milkshakes, I encourage you to grant yourself some grace and indulge. Make yourself a priority. Eat cake. Another hurdle I needed to address was being faced with all of our memories. As I walked through my home, I was confronted with Steve at every turn. When you lose a loved one that you shared a home with, you are faced with all of the belongings you shared. There are things, and even more things. For some crazy reason, I felt the need to go through all of Steve's belongings immediately after his funeral. I'm not sure why it was important for me to do that, but my sister and my mom came over and helped empty the dressers and closets, hoping that I wouldn't regret that decision the very next day. I know that many people hang on to their loved ones' belongings for a much longer time frame, but somehow not opening my closet and being faced with his belongings was helpful in my process. I did not get rid of everything. I kept a few things that I knew he loved, and we made blankets out of some of his favorite shirts. I did what I needed to do to make my surroundings more bearable. Again, this was my individual choice, and it may not work for everyone. I encourage you to find what makes your living space comforting. One of the most terrifying tasks I had to face was home maintenance. I took small steps and figured out what I needed to do, like how to use a snowblower, how to change the furnace filter, how to change the gas for the grill, and even how to drive my car through a car wash. Lining my tires up with those little tracks terrifies me. I had to find a strength within me that I never knew existed, and I did it. There were tears often involved, but I figured out the best way to tackle all of these chores and tasks that once belonged to Steve. Although grief is so debilitating, I can also tell you it is so empowering. My next step in healing was going back to work. Boy, was I terrified. Everyone had different advice regarding my return to work. Some people said I should take the year off. Others said jump right back in the saddle. I personally knew I needed to get back to work, but since it was the height of the pandemic, getting back to teaching looked a little different. We had been teaching remotely since the beginning of the year, so I hadn't been in the physical presence of most of my coworkers since March 13th. On January 5th, they announced we were heading back into the building. Returning to work now meant physically being in the building with other teachers. None of my coworkers had been able to really see me to provide condolences because we were only allowed 10 people at the funeral, and of course, we couldn't sit Shiva. The thought of even entering the building was completely overwhelming. My first few weeks of being back at work were challenging. I had to put my game face on for all those little kinders. I was probably not the best teacher in the world, but I needed to be there. Those kids brought me back to life. They reminded me that I love to teach and that I make a difference in this world. Upon returning to work, it was interesting to see the people who approached me face on and the others who looked in the opposite direction. I learned that not everyone handles grief. Try not to get upset if someone doesn't acknowledge your loss. That is their baggage, not yours. Even some of the people closest to me had a difficult time knowing how to support me, and I had to learn to accept that. While I say getting back to work was key in my healing process, I also understand there are many grieving people who don't get back to work. I spoke with several widows whose husbands were the breadwinners, and they hadn't worked for years. Again, going back to work is an individual choice. It is what I needed, but everyone needs to figure out what feels right for them. Another challenge was socialization. When was the right time to be social again? If I did go out, would I be judged for not staying at home, mourning the loss of my spouse? Did I need to wait a year to be happy? Sitting at home, shopping on Amazon every Saturday night wasn't helping my process or my finances. I don't know what or if there's a correct time frame, but my friends knew I couldn't sit at home every weekend, so they all made efforts to invite me out. The first time I ventured out socially, I went with my lifelong best friends. I knew I wasn't ready, and it was a huge failure, ending in tears, but it helped me get my feet back in the water. It took me a little while to decide to go out again, but I knew I could do it. Don't give up if you need to take a few steps back once in a while. Each step forward brings you closer to being whole again. I am very proud of my children, Jared and Shelby. We have done so many things we doubted we could do. We are now following a routine which looks different than our old life, but we have each other's backs and we rely on each other in times of need. I cannot emphasize this enough. There is no one-stop shop for treating grief. There are days when you feel like you just can't go on, and other days when you somehow pick yourself up and smile, and you might even catch yourself laughing. You are accountable for your own recovery and healing, and you deserve to be happy. I can promise you that. I will end with this. There is no one recipe to process our grief. We are all different in how we handle loss. That is why it is so difficult. It would be much easier if someone could just say, complete step 1, then step 2, and after step 3, you'll be fine. I wish I could do that for everyone, but it isn't true. Grief is complex and unique to each person. When you are faced with grief, you somehow become the captain on an unpredictable voyage that you never even wanted to board. Everyone needs to find what is helpful in their process. Find what fills your soul and helps you smile. For me, it was getting back to work, being with friends and family, and writing my blog. I understand what it's like to feel completely alone and afraid, but I also know what it is like to feel strong and resilient. I am proud of my progress, and I'm always happy to talk to others who are facing the same challenges I have had. Please keep in mind there's no correct time frame, and there's no magic we can perform to overcome grief. We each just need to remember that we are the captains of our own ship, and that we are responsible for finding the best way to ride the waves to get to calmer waters. While on your journey, don't forget to look up into the sky. You might see a star and know it is your loved one watching over you and leading you in the right direction. Thank you to Lori and Marcia for inviting me to talk and for running these special programs.
Thank you so much, Marcy. We will now hear from Lori Garber Amram, a grief specialist at JCFS Chicago, who will share a beautiful slideshow of ideas for us to consider as we mourn our loved ones during the fall season. Welcome, Lori.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here this evening. Thank you, Marcy, for your courage in sharing your story, and Rabbi Joe for your instructive wisdom. We meet here tonight in the middle of autumn, the bittersweet season of beauty, loss, and hope. The leaves are brilliant as they shimmer in the sun and shimmy with the wind, and soon they will be gone. The beauty of autumn gives way to a sense of loss and emptiness when we see the bare branches of the tree ready to brave the shorter, darker, and colder days ahead. Author Jamie Anderson describes that grief is really just love. It's all the love you want to give but cannot. All that unspent love gathers up in the corners of your eyes, the lump in your throat, and in that hollow part of your chest. Grief is just love with no place to go. There are many ways grief can be expressed in your body, as well as through your emotions and thoughts. Experiencing how grief affects you is an important element in healing from loss. There is no way around the pain and the disequilibrium of grief. The way is through. Your experience of grief and the healing journey is unique to you and is impacted by the relationship you had with your loved one. Some of you here this evening lost a loved one with whom there was a difficult relationship, or there may have been challenging circumstances surrounding the loss, like not being able to be present at the hospital due to COVID protocols. Others have experienced an untimely loss. Some grieve a loss to suicide, while others here this evening mourn losing your loved one after a long period of illness. And you're all at different points on the grief journey. Let's look at the confusing and contradictory ways grief may manifest itself. This abbreviated list is just some of the common ways individuals may experience grief. Looking at this list, the cognitive and behavioral manifestations, physical manifestations, emotional manifestations, what do you recognize as having experienced in your grief journey? As Marcy mentioned, there is no right or wrong way to grieve. Accepting that pain is an inevitable response to the loss of someone you love is an important aspect of the healing journey. Initially, experiencing the intense, confusing, and sometimes contradictory expressions of grief can make you wonder how and if you can ever recover from this loss. Like grief, the road to healing is uniquely yours to navigate. As Marcy noted, leaning on family and friends, reaching out, asking for and accepting support do make a difference and are, for many, an essential aspect of the healing process. Identify who is in your circle of support. The circle may include pets, friends, neighbors, co-workers, support group members, synagogue friends, and family. Each support within your circle can offer something different. Some friends are there to cry with, others to walk with, others you will share a meal with, or a cup of coffee. A pet reminds you that you are needed and offers unconditional love and companionship. Who and what is in your circle of support? Do you need additional support through participation in a group and/or a mental health professional? We at JCFS are here as well to be part of your circle of support. This is a time for self-care. Get in the habit of asking yourself, what do I need right now? Sometimes the answer will surprise you. Sometimes you may have to push yourself to eat, drink a glass of water, step outdoors for fresh air and a change of perspective, or call someone. Other times you may need to give yourself permission to do less, make a cup of tea, lie down to rest, say no to an activity, or I can't, or Can you help me? Marcy leaned on family and friends. She made a decision, a choice to take care of herself. The care you invest in healing your broken heart will help you to carry your loved one's memory and legacy forward in meaningful ways. Mitch Albom writes in Tuesdays with Maury that death ends a life, not a relationship. As Rabbi Joe spoke so beautifully about, this past Shabbat, the Torah portion, Lech Lecha, was read. Abraham is instructed to leave his land, his relatives, and his father's home. He leaves all that is familiar to him. This feeling of leaving all that is familiar to you may very well describe those who are mourning a loss. You have left a life that was familiar to you and ventured into what grief expert Alan Wolfelt calls the wilderness of grief. One translation of the words Lech Lecha, as Rabbi Joe noted, is go to yourself. Autumn brings with it a sense of loss and an invitation for quiet reflection, of going inward to yourself to reflect on what has been lost. You may wonder how you will live life without your loved ones. The death of someone close to you leaves a hole in you and your life. The loss changes an important part of your identity as spouse, parent, sibling, friend, or child, depending on your relationship to the deceased. Over time, you will grapple with reorganizing your life and your sense of self. You will reflect on what remains and how to continue your life with loss. Here too, Jewish wisdom can be instructive. This is the year of Shemitah. Every 7th year, we enter a year of Shemitah, a year when the Bible instructs us to allow the fields to lie fallow, to rest, recover, and regenerate to support growth once again. Each autumn, the trees must lose their leaves to support life in the spring. The wisdom of grief and mourning is to pause, regroup, and allow for a renewed relationship with your loved one and with life to emerge over time. The healing process is not one of grief shrinking. Grief does not end. Grief is an internal process that seeks expression through the mourning process. As you find meaningful ways to share and be with your feelings, you are healing. Your life is growing. You don't move on from grief. Rather, you move forward together with your grief as your capacity to engage with life and discover a renewed sense of meaning and purpose emerge. Slowly, around the painful wound of loss, healing occurs. And I'd like to invite you to take a moment just to look at this diagram, which illustrates this in such a clear way, that the grief initially fills almost your entire being. And over time, the grief stays the same, but your life becomes bigger as you re-engage with life. A tree's leaves must be shed for the tree to bud again in springtime with new life. Like the bare tree, those grieving eventually will find ways to re-engage with life and establish a new relationship with their loved one. Death is the end of a life, not a relationship. How will you remember your loved one? We are so grateful to Scott Bauer, who supports our programming, tonight's program, to honor the life of his wife, Lori. The task of creating meaning from death is how our loved one lives on. Albert Einstein wrote that death is not an end if we can live on in our children and the younger generation, for they are us. Our bodies are only wilted leaves on the tree of life. Fallen leaves nourish the soil to support life. How can the memory of your loved one inspire not only you, but others? There is a park near my home where I take walks. There are plaques of remembrance honoring deceased loved ones on the benches and at the base of the trees. I never tire of reading their names, the qualities that they are remembered for, and how beloved they are. They remind me of what is most important in a life well lived. How will you remember your loved one? May the memory of your loved one be for a blessing. Let's take a few minutes of quiet reflection to recall your loved one. I invite you to close your eyes lightly. Feel yourself breathing in and exhaling out. Feel yourself breathing, connecting with life. Allow the inhale to fill and renew you. Let the exhale empty you and create inner space. As you breathe comfortably, recall your loved one. Breathe them to your mind's eye. Bring them into your mind's eye. See their face. Study the details. And now say their name silently or softly. Let their memory touch your heart. Let their memory fill your heart. As you consider the ways in which they have influenced you and the life you live, and the ways they continue to inspire you. Breathe together with your loved one and offer them a few words. Know that you can come back to this place at any time. Death ends a life, not a relationship. May your loved one be the source of many blessings that you bring through the life that you live. May their memory be for a blessing. If your eyes are closed, please open them when you are ready. And look at all the others who have joined with you in community, recognizing and acknowledging that you have come together to support one another at this most challenging of times. We invite Cantor Amy Zussman to sing for us Autumn Leaves in Hebrew. You will see the English translation up on the slide. After she sings the Hebrew, Cantor Zussman will sing in English, and even though we'll all remain on mute, please sing along.
הערים הנושרים, דוהים מחוץ לחלון, עלי השלכת, אדומים וצהובים, אני רואה את שפתך, את נשיקות הקיץ, היד השזופה אותה, נהגתי לאחוז. מאז שעזבת רק מתארכים הימים, ובקרוב אשמע את שיר החורף הוותיק, אך אליך אני מתגעגעת יותר מכל, יקירי. כשעלה שלכת מתחילים לנשור. The falling leaves drift by the window, the autumn leaves of red and gold. I see your lips, the summer kisses, the sunburned hands I used to hold. Since you went away, the days grow long, and soon I'll hear old winter's song. But I miss you most of all, my darling, when autumn leaves start to fall. אך אליך אני מתגעגעת יותר מכל, יקירי. כשעלה שלכת מתחילים לנשור. As you heard from Rabbi Joe earlier this evening, in the Parsha Lech Lecha, God tells Abraham and Sarah to leave their home, the familiar, the predictable, and travel to a new unknown location. And not only were Abraham and Sarah moving to a new physical place, but they were also embarking on a deeper internal journey. It's a frightening task. What makes the journey difficult? Fear of the unknown, fear of getting lost, fear of isolation, of being alone? Yes, to all of the above. But we need to remember it's okay to ask for directions as we go on our way, because we're never alone. We have our faith, we have family, we have friends, we have community, and the support of JCFS. May we all be blessed on our journey through this autumn season.
Thank you very much, Cantor Zussman and Lori, for your beautiful words and your music tonight. As we move through to the last part of our formal program, we'd like you to take some additional ideas home with you. Consider the role of song and in music and the power of singing through your grief, and also to consider the power of writing to help you move through this different stages of grief that we know are not linear. The author Claire Bidwell Smith, author of Anxiety, the Missing Stage of Grief, writes the following in chapter 7, if anyone wants to listen to it on their audible book. I feel strongly that grief is a living, breathing thing inside of us. We must find ways to let it out in order to alleviate suffering and anxiety. Writing out your grief can be a powerful tool. And Marcy has certainly taught us that. And we will send you the link to Marcy's blog, which is quite extraordinary, as she is. So maybe you'll choose a fancy linen journal or an old notebook lying around, your laptop or the back of an envelope. But we invite you to find times to write whenever you can, whenever you like. Write about your memories, your feelings, your recollections. Include the painful moments and the funny anecdotes. Share them with others or choose not to. Publish a blog or don't. Read other blogs on grief we can recommend. Share them with new friends that are also in grief, with your grief group members or your rabbi or your cantor or your friends. Find ways to honor the memory of your loved ones that are important to you, and please continue to honor your own well-being. So in addition, and you'll see this poem that we've included here, and we will send you out the slides and lots of other resources. We invite you to also save the date for a future program on this related topic called Hope and Healing Through Writing that Marcia Reynes and Carol will be facilitating, and we will share more information with you in the coming week. You will also be receiving a bibliography and some other resources and information about upcoming grief groups. And most importantly, as I mentioned earlier, our program evaluation. If you will please take 2 minutes when it comes to your inbox to share your feedback with us. We value your experience tonight, and we'd love for you to let us know what else you might be looking for. So in a few minutes, you will see a pop-up message that invites you to a breakout room. This part of the program will be led by Marcia or Lori or Rabbi Joe for conversation in small group setting where you can share a little bit more in conversation, because we know this was a very frontal part of the program. And each of them will be facilitating these smaller groups. The last part is I'm just going to thank everyone who participated tonight, to Cantor Amy Zussman, to Rabbi Joe, to our beloved Marcy Shore and Lori Garber Amram for their beautiful remarks, and a special shout out to our Senior Director of Community Services, Ann Luban, who's helped us behind the scenes with all of her macro and micro tech support, and to Marcia Reynes, head of our grief program. So we will close this part of the program with our blessings for you, and that you are all each other's blessings on this grief journey, as Cantor Zussman sings the beautiful Debbie Friedman melody, Lechi Lach. And then I'll come back at the very end, say more things. Cantor, I'm so sorry, I accidentally muted you. I have to unmute yourself. I'm so sorry. It was supposed to be mine.
No worries. Lechi lach, to a land that I will show you. Lech lecha, to a place you do not know. Lechi lach, on your journey I will bless you, and you shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing. Lechi lach. Please join me in the second verse. Lechi lach, and I shall make your name great. Lech lecha, and all shall praise your name. Lechi lach, to the place that I will show you. L'simchat chayim, l'simchat chayim, L'simchat chayim l'chilach. And you shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing. And you shall be a blessing. L'chilach.
Thank you so much to everyone who's participated and joined us this evening. If you would like to stay with us and join the breakout rooms, many people like to have a chance to talk with others, albeit briefly, meet other people and hear more about other supports JCFS offers. And if you're ready to say goodnight, we wish you a Laila Tov, a good evening.
And you shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing. L'chilach. And you shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing. L'chilach.